Okay, I understand we're live. Okay, well, welcome everybody to our meeting, our special planning committee and official plan review working committee meeting this morning, a continuation from Monday morning. Welcome everybody. It's winter up here again. Oh my gosh. So we'll just carry on, and I have to do a few of the procedural things right now. So I'm going to let you know that this is an electronic meeting. Being held in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001 due to COVID-19 pandemic. I am verbally confirming the members present, and that will be all of our planning committee with the exception of Councillor Nishikawa. I don't see her here yet. And we have our official plan review working committee members are all present. I also confirm that the CAO, Clerk, Director of Development Services and Environmental Sustainability, and other members of the staff are present. There was public input invited at planning@muskokalakes.ca. And in terms of today's meeting, it is being live streamed and recorded on the Township of Muskoka Lakes website and YouTube channel. By participating in the open public meeting today, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded and posted online. And as become the norm now, motions have been pre-populated with random movers and seconders to expedite the meeting, and voting will be done by raising our hands unless for some reason that doesn't work. And then we will call each member, but it won't be considered a recorded vote. So I do acknowledge that there is a supplementary agenda today, and that will be that Linda Haslam-Stroud from the Skeleton Lake Cottagers organization is going to provide public comments once we get past this sort of procedural part of this to us on the first draft. And I'm also going to now ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I think we'll carry on now. So I do have a few opening comments that I would like to make. It has come to our attention that there seems to be some concern about public input into this process. So I just want to review that for everybody, and particularly those who may be listening in now. The quote normal process and how this had been set up originally was that our working group or steering committee, that would be our 5 members and 3 councillors, were to look at the first draft of this agenda, do the refinements of it, and then bring it over to the planning committee. That would have been done out of the public eye. So normally there would be no public involvement at all at this stage. But as some of you who know us all well now, this is the council that likes to be involved in a lot of things. So the planning committee wanted to be part of this whole process. And when that started, we had to kick in all of the regulations that include being open to the public, accepting comments, which we're happy to do, having it recorded, and publishing the draft. So that's just a little bit of background for you, because we're in the very, very early stages of this right now. There will be lots of ability to comment, and I'm actually going to ask Director Pink if he would just once again go through the process and really clarify where we're going and when we can have public input, just so everybody understands that. So if you would, Director Pink, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. Good morning, committee members. Looking forward to the discussion today. Further to the Chair's openings comments, I would just reiterate that is correct. Had this discussion been in front of solely a working committee, it would not obviously be subject to the Township's procedural bylaw. It would not have to be advertised online, would not have to be webcasted, minutes being recorded, and an ability for the public to delegate. So just to clarify, I did send an email to everyone last night, but perhaps you may not have had time to review that as of yet. So I'm happy to reiterate or go over those comments again, and also to the benefit of those who may be watching on YouTube. There will be ample opportunity to comment and provide further input into this process as we move things along. As I said, typically we would be reviewing draft 1 as we are now in front of a steering committee. But it is just a draft one. We do have a number of meetings. This is number 2 of 4 in our work program to review draft 1. And we're hoping culminating out of those meetings will be a refined draft 2 version. There's also, as Mr. McDonald noted at the last meeting, other township departments, public works, emergency services, etc., are reviewing the draft as well, and they will be providing comments to the consulting team, and a draft 2 will be produced after these meetings. That draft 2 we hope to circulate to the district and other interested agencies and stakeholders. As well, there will be an opportunity for further public input at that stage. We're hoping later this spring. Obviously, due to the ongoing pandemic, we have not determined the format of that public input at this stage, but we hope to, at the conclusion of these meetings, have a brief discussion about what the committee wishes that public engagement to look like later this summer. What will be produced, the consulting team will produce a consultation summary document of all the comments that were received through that, and this committee or these committees will meet again and discuss all those public comments that were received from that public engagement session. Again, in the work program, we have a number of meetings set up. What will be produced after those meetings is draft 3, version 1. We will discuss that draft again at length in a number of meetings, and again further refine that before finally producing draft 3, version 2. Once both committees are satisfied in council with version 2 of draft 3, we will enter into the statutory public meeting process and further opportunities for the public to provide their input and submissions. There will be a statutory open house and a statutory public meeting where formal submissions will be solicited. After that, these committees will meet yet again, a number of meetings in order to further discuss, and the consulting team will produce a further document of all the comments that we receive from the public, where we will finally, hopefully after the conclusion of those meetings, produce draft 4. At that point, we'll be hopefully in a position to consider putting draft 4 in front of council for consideration of adoption. Finally, just for those familiar with the Planning Act process with a lower tier municipality, the approval of an official plan at the lower tier level, the approval authority is the District of Muskoka, and once our council adopts the official plan, it will be forwarded to the District of Muskoka for final approval. So hopefully that clarifies 2 things. One, the amount of opportunities and when those opportunities will be for further public input. So hopefully the community is not concerned that this is their one and only opportunity. There will be ample opportunities this summer and spring. And as I noted in the email, I will update, and our communications specialist is already working on updating our Engage page to make that more clear for the public as to where these touch points are. He's already working on a graphic. And I hope the second part that comes out loud and clear is the amount of review, meetings, and discussions that such an important project undertakes. I commend those volunteers. You may be regretting signing up for that many meetings, but I think it is an important part to have a very thorough and thoughtful discussions and debate on what are very important topics. So without further ado, hopefully that helps describe the process. Certainly available to answer any questions, and hopefully we can get into a discussion on the first policy direction soon.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. Are there any questions on that? Okay, great. So my next procedural duty here is to relax the rules and regulations so we can have the kind of discussion that we had on Monday. So moved by Councillor Jaglowitz, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 2.3.2 of the Township's procedural bylaw 2019-079, the rules of procedure are hereby suspended for the duration of the official plan review of the first draft, and that they be reinstated at the conclusion of the review. Any comments? All in favor? Madam Clerk, I believe that carries. Okay, thank you. Okay, so before I turn this over to Mr. McDonald again, so we can start going through our document, our resource document here, I just have a couple of more things I would like to say from our meeting on Monday. First of all, I know that Councillor Zavitz raised shipping containers or whatever you want to call it. And I think it's important we have that discussion. I have asked Mr. Pink to start his list on what we're going to deal with when we finish with this current document. I think that's something that needs a fulsome discussion. It could be in certain other areas of this document. So I just didn't want you to think that it's forgotten. So that's one. The second that I wanted to refer back to from Monday was actually, Bob, your comments that you were concerned that you hadn't been heard, and you have been heard. I think the overall part of this is that there's 18 people here, and what the consultants have done have taken the direction from the majority of these people. And that's where we sit now. And we're going to have more input, and things can change, whatever. But I did want to acknowledge that you had been heard. And so before I turn this back over to Mr. McDonald, we're going to delve into this, and I'm going to try and keep us on track to exactly what's here, so we can keep our comments to what we're dealing with in this document. If there's something new that you think you'd like to raise, briefly, we can put it on the list, and then concentrate on what's in front of us, just trying to keep things moving here. But always comments are welcome. So Mr. McDonald, I see you're here. Oh, skeleton link. Sorry, I forgot. Forgive me. I forgot our delegation. So thank you, David. So I would like to invite, are we in yet? This is Linda. Is Miss Haslam-Stroud? She's coming in right now. Oh, there you are. Miss Haslam-Stroud, welcome. And please give us, oh, you're on mute. Thank you very much. If you could, I know it's technology, right? If you could give us your name and address, that would be terrific. And I believe you're aware that it's a 2-minute presentation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
My name is Linda Haslam-Stroud, and my permanent address is 23 Leander Road, RR3 Utterson, Ontario, P0B1M0.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. The Skeleton Lake Cottagers organization is very concerned that the draft does not mitigate the potential threats posed by the aggregate operations on or near waterfront areas. When we left the pre-meetings, we were left with the impression that the committee and council were looking to strengthen the protection of our waterfronts, specifically in the aggregate area. And certainly your approved policy direction reflected that. There's 2 areas that I have time to address. The first, the OP presently has a clear, unambiguous statement in the waterfront section, and it says, aggregate operations shall not be permitted in the waterfront designation. That strong statement has been deleted in the new draft and replaced with a weaker statement that says the township shall not generally support. Obviously, words matter. Compare shall not be permitted with shall not generally support. And there is a clear erosion of the protection of waterfront area for aggregate operations. And we are requesting that the original language shall not be permitted be reintroduced. Second issue, in the existing OP, it's very clear and unequivocal. It says new rock crushing operations shall be limited to areas farther than 2 kilometers from the waterfront designation. The new draft says new rock crushing operations shall be discouraged within 2 kilometers. Obviously, the word discouraged has loosened the restriction and should be replaced with a stronger word, possibly prohibited, which in fact was in your policy direction. and that would, of course, eliminate any potential ambiguity. These points are defensible, and these objectives are compatible with the town's vision and policy direction. These two amendments would take us back to the status quo, and then the improvements you directed would require further consideration. Thank you for protecting our lakes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haslam-Stroud. Are there any questions from committee? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I'm fully of the support of what the Skeleton Lake Association have presented, and I think we should put those two back in, as we said we would, or implied we would, during the policy directions, those two clauses. Thank you.
Okay, so what maybe I could break those down just from where I'm sitting. The shall and permitted recurs often throughout this document, and I think that's part of the discussion. So if you would allow me, let's discuss that when we get to this part of the policy. But I know that the rock crushing is very, very concerning. So my suggestion would be if I could get a straw count from this group, that we revert to what was the wording in our old OP, that would be the direction that we want to give going forward. Then are the hands up questions, or are we voting yes? We're voting yes, okay. Okay, so all those who would be in favor of retaining that wording. All right, so I believe that we have direction there, Mr. Pink, for that. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Haslam-Stroud. We'll look at the other one when we get to that section.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I believe that now, there you are, Mr. McDonald. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Roberts, what are you?
I believe the mayor has had his hand up.
Sorry, Mayor Harding.
That's okay. Just a quick question for you, I guess, to Mr. McDonald or Mr. Pink. I didn't vote on the last topic, though I agree, I understand in principle. I guess my question to staff and the consultants, what was the rationale in loosening the restrictions? And that may help me understand a little bit more why we went down this road.
I'm going to ask Mr. Pink to reply to that, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think if one reviews the provincial policy statement and those policy provisions in regards to protecting aggregate resources, I think you'll see a lot of similar policy language in the current draft of the OP. I think the clear consensus and direction was given from both committees to reinsert the language in the current draft, and the second draft will contain that language.
Does that help you, Mayor Harding?
Well, not really, but if I'm reading between the lines, I believe what we did in this draft was to try to be more in step with where the provincial mandate is and the provincial policy statement, which is a little bit more, I'll say, encouraging of aggregates, and we want to be more discouraging. That's, if I can understand that, that's why we changed the language, but clearly this council does not want to be encouraging.
I think that's a pretty good read, actually. So, okay. So, Mr. Pink, we have that. And Ms. Haslam-Stroud, I'm going to ask Lauren to take you back into the waiting room. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Okay. All right, Mr. McDonald, I believe that we are going over to you at this point, and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here again today, and wanted to make a few opening remarks. There was a reason I put a disclaimer on the bottom of every page in the official plan. It is kind of unusual in my experience to go through the first cut of an official plan in such a public setting. Works for me. I'm okay with that, obviously, but it does make it a little bit more challenging, because what we've done is given you our first draft of what we think it could look like, knowing full well that after 18 people look at it, plus all of the members of the public, it may look substantially different in some respects as we go through it. So it's kind of a unique process, certainly in my experience, but we're certainly looking forward to the discussions that we're going to have. And even as I reread some of the policies that we've prepared, oh, there's a typo here, there's an issue here that needs to be fixed. There's a number that didn't get transcribed properly. So there are a few of those gremlins in the document that, of course, obviously surface in the first draft, but obviously wouldn't be there in the last draft. So I wanted to echo Mr. Pigg's comments about the process and quite frankly, how many times this group is going to have an ability to provide input into the actual wording before it is eventually adopted. And it is pretty unique to Muskoka Lakes, but that's fine. We'll work with that and we'll make it work. So I'm certainly looking forward to the conversation. So in terms of how I see today going, as I mentioned at the last meeting, I thought the best thing to do was to focus on the policy directions themselves, because we did spend so much time on them last year. And what I wanted to do is to clearly indicate how we have implemented those policy directions with specific reference to the policy and the official plan that does just that. So I want to go through them one by one. And what I'm thinking is, for example, policy direction number 1, I would just go through all of them and say, here's how we did this. Are there any questions about how we've implemented that direction? Is how we've done it clear? Is it not clear? Could it be clearer? Is there something we've missed? And so on. So this is the opportunity to see how we've translated what the direction that we've received into actual policy. So in terms of moving forward, I'm not sure how long this is going to take, but certainly it would be great if we got through all of them today. But that might be ambitious, I'll say right up front, but maybe that could be a goal. But let's start from there. I'm also thinking as well that perhaps around 10:30 or so, we take a brief 10-minute break. I also want to indicate that 12 o'clock is a hard stop for me. I do have other engagements at that time. So perhaps around 10 to 12 or around there, we break wherever we are and we have a conversation about what the next meeting will look like and what we'll prepare in advance of that meeting if we have that opportunity. So with that being said, I'm going to ask you, Chair Bridgeman, if there are any questions or comments about this approach and whether everyone's on board with going down this road as I've suggested.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald. I see Councillor Edwards.
No, I think that's fine. If Mr. McDonald, when he's coming to the policy, would actually state the page we can follow it on our actual agenda, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I think we're good, Mr. McDonald.
That's great. Somebody just told me there was too much light in my office, so I just moved a little bit to fix that problem. So hopefully I have. Okay, so yes, I believe I heard Councillor Edwards indicating that page numbers are helpful, so we will certainly do that to the best of our ability. I will point out sometimes that page numbers change when they're printed and in different formats, but we'll certainly do our best. So the primary document I'm going to look at is the companion document that was sent around with the official plan called Implementing Policy Directions. And basically what we've done here is we've taken the policy direction as it was exactly worded in the council endorsed document from last year. And we've reproduced that. And then on the right-hand side, what we've done is we've identified exactly what policy in the official plan implements that direction. So for example, in the Lake System Health Policy Direction, there's a whole series of subsections A to F. So what we've done is for item A, if you look on the right-hand column, we'll say item A is implemented in these sections, and then B is so on. So we've tried to be very clear on how we've done that. There are a few policy directions that don't have A, B's, or C's in them, and therefore we don't have an A, B, or C in the right-hand column because it's relatively simple and more straightforward. So we try to show clearly how the policy direction has been implemented. So with that being said, I'm going to start with number one, always a good place to start, lake system health. So there's a lot in here, and of course it's a key issue in the township and in the wider district, so that's why it's probably number one where it should be. And there are a few things in here that we've done. So item A is to implement the enhanced protection policies from the district's plan and apply those enhanced protection policies to new lots, development on vacant lots, and redevelopment on vacant lots on all lakes within the township. And as I indicated in our last meeting, what we've done is we've taken the enhanced policies, and I put enhanced in quotations, and made them the base policies in the township's official plan. So you won't see the word enhanced. There might be an odd one that I'll have to find and deal with, but basically I'm not making that distinction. So the district's plan says, here are the base policies and here are the enhanced policies, if you so choose to open that door and go through it. And what we've done is done just that and made those the base policies in the township. So I'll go through the sections that implement that in a moment, but you'll see that they are E44, E45, and E46. There's two ways we can do this because there is a lot of complexity here. I'm thinking with this one, maybe we just talk about A and then stop and see if there are any questions. Some of the other ones I think we could probably more easily group together. So now that I've explained that, now I would ask you to look at the official plan itself and those three sections. So E44 begins, and I'm just scrolling myself, so you'll have to forgive me. That begins on page 53 of the official plan. So these three sections, so E44, and I'll just provide a quick overview. E44 deals with lot creation. And there's a number of policies within there. E45 deals with development of vacant lots, and I'll come back to that. And then E46 deals with redevelopment on existing lots. So within these sections, there is a lot of policy. So what I propose to do is provide an overview and open it up for questions in terms of how we dealt with this. So lot creation is a big deal, obviously, and that's where the policies start. And what we've done in this section E44, is we've established a section firstly that identifies what the general lot creation conditions are. And essentially there is encouragement within this section for folks to do better than the 20 meters for buildings and 30 meters for leaching beds, if that ability exists through a lot creation process. However, those are the minimums and they would be accepted. But item I supports increased setbacks wherever possible. There's a requirement for a site-specific soils investigation in accordance with township or district guidelines. We talked about that at our last meeting as well. That's certainly something the township would be requiring in a lot creation circumstance today, so that's not really new. There's also a requirement to demonstrate the ability of the soils to effectively retain phosphorus, always a key issue. And then lastly, and as a condition of approval, there would be a requirement for monitoring and to ensure that that monitoring is carried out for a period of time that is no less than 10 years. All of those things are easy to do in a lot creation scenario because you can attach conditions, and then through this process there is a site plan agreement also required, and then those conditions get implemented through that process. So that's those provisions apply to any lot creation application. We then look to steep slopes in section E442, and these are policies that are already in your existing official plan. But what we've done is we've increased the minimum water frontages depending on the slopes that exist on individual properties. So for example, if the water frontage of 90 meters, so the water frontage, is 90 meters on lands with slopes of greater than 20% and less than 40%. It used to be 60 meters. It used to be 90 meters on lots with slopes greater than 40. Now it's 120. And we've done the same thing with slopes that are greater than 60%. It used to be 120, now it's 150. So we've made those increases as per another policy direction that also asked us to increase the minimum lot frontages along the big lakes and other lakes in the township. I do notice a few hands up, and I'm certainly open to taking questions at any point to provide any additional explanation.
Well, thank you. Let's do that. So we're sort of on your topic as the questions come up. Patricia?
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. I have a question. I know there is a section on community planning permits. In the general lot creation conditions, it says that would be implemented through a zoning bylaw, site plan control, or community planning permit, or other agreements registered on title. I need some clarification on the difference between site plan control and community planning. There's discussion about instituting community planning permits throughout the waterfront. In this document, I believe it states that site plan control will be instituted for all development and redevelopment on the waterfront. Am I correct, Nick? Please, through you, Chair.
Yeah, so that's correct. So what we've done here is we basically said there is no community planning permit system currently in the township, and if one is instituted in the future, then that would be the way in which some of these approvals would be given. So what we've done is we've left all of our options open in terms of how these policies would be implemented. So for example, if there is no community planning permit system, people will require a lot creation approval, and they'll also require site plan approval, and the potential exists for a minor variance if they can't meet some of the standards on the bylaw. If there is a community planning permit system in place, they still have to go through a lot creation process, but the community planning permit process deals with the minor variance, and then you can attach conditions to the actual community planning permit. And I think I'm going to use development permit because it's much easier to say it that way. And then you can attach conditions to a development permit that basically implement the same things you would do through a site plan agreement. There would also be an agreement registered on title as well through that process. So that's why we've kind of put every possible planning process there to ensure that no matter what process is in effect, that's how we would implement it, these policies. Hopefully that's clear.
Thank you.
Would you like a follow-up?
No, the supplemental would be a little different. I'll hold on to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you very much. Two quick questions. One, I'm going to back up just to see if this is a slight change. Regulation E4 3B4. I feel like under the eye. And that's the lot coverage at 10%. And I know in our zoning bylaw we have a 10%. Just want to clarify, we had in the old official plan, we would allow up to an 11%. We're now moving this down from 11 to 10 in this particular clause. Is that correct? Question number one.
Okay, so my understanding is that it is 10%, but there is a provision that allows for a variance of that, so it became effectively 11%. So that was essentially the standard, even though it was 10%. Perhaps I can ask Mr. Pink to more fully explain that, because we have not carried forward this built-in variance moving forward. But Mr. Pink can perhaps provide some background on that.
Mr. Pink?
Thank you, Chair. That's a very good question through you to your worship. Very good question that you've noted that, and I think it is a fairly substantial change, and I wanted committees to be cognizant of what this means, because I think there's sort of disadvantages and advantages to our current plan. Our current plan is very detailed, quite prescriptive, almost to the extent of a zoning bylaw. It doesn't say a lot coverage of 11% is allowed, but what it does say is that consideration can be given to 1/10 without the need for an official plan amendment. The benefit of that is it's very prescriptive, and it serves us quite well in that extremely rare for an application to come forward for greater than 11% coverage in our township. The only ones that really do are when existing development is over 11%, and the policies do recognize that. But we extremely rarely get a proposal for a vacant lot or for a proposal to go from less than 11 to greater than 11. The drawback, in my mind, when you become so prescriptive, is that everyone applies for 11%. So what we've done, what Mr. McDonald has done, is gone back to a more traditional, recognizes the 10%, and each application will be reviewed. I think this is a good discussion for committee to have, whether we're comfortable with the status quo, which I think unfortunately leads some people to believe that 11% is somewhat of a given. However, like I said, I do want to stress there are benefits to that, in that we've been successful at LPAT and actually quite successful in preventing applications over 11% in the first place from even being submitted. Staff very clearly advises applicants just will not be supported, and that an official plan amendment is needed, and it's served the community quite well in that regard. So if that language wishes to be reinserted, again, we can consider that in draft 2.
Mayor Harding, your hand's still up. Do you have a supplementary?
Well, I have a second question that's going to talk about steep slopes as the where we went to, but I'll let committee sort of chime in on the 10% or the 11% potential provision at this point.
Okay, thank you. Patricia? Ms. Arnie?
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. I apologize. I'm not going to follow up on the 10%, but I am going to seek staff input on the change to the 90-meter frontage on all lakes, and to what extent. I'm thinking of properties that had 400 feet of frontage and planned to subdivide because they wanted to have a lot for their children. That would now require an OP amendment, and I would like to know what David's feelings are in terms of our success in fighting that, since it is in the OP now.
Okay, so thank you. I'm going to ask you to hold that. Let's stay on the 10%. We're going to sort of stay that, but haven't forgotten it. We'll just hold it for a minute. And Bob Clark.
So probably comments on every single section we're going to discuss today, but on this 10 to 11%, let's just remember that we're supposed to be here to help David. I'm going to suggest that we keep the exact same language. The practical side of that, he said it rarely happens, and when it does happen and people try to exceed it, he gets support at LPAT. And I think what we should be trying to do in this document is not get to LPAT, which when I read through it the other day, I figured we were going to spend the next 10 years at LPAT. And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but if you get to the practical side of this, the reality is where you need 11% is on the smaller lots, where people are trying to move up here as permanent residents. And we're seeing more of that happening certainly in the current environment. And they're on a 100-foot lot with an old style cottage that's been built as a bungalow. As soon as they do that, and you're probably seeing this in Bala and down on Walker's Point and a lot of those areas, you can't build a garage because you're already at 10 or 10 point something percent. Your lot's probably half an acre. You certainly can't have a boathouse. And now you have to start making choices about tearing your cottage down and building something new that incorporates some of those features or allows that square footage. So it's not the big giant places or anything that are looking for this. And frankly, even in that case, if you've got the big giant place, the 11%, the extra 1% doesn't matter. It's not gonna make a big difference because it's within the 60 meters. So anyway, that's my input.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair. This is more in the form of a question than a comment. Is my understanding was that it doesn't matter what we put in here, there is a minor variance procedure under Committee of Adjustment, is there not? And maybe someone could just explain, if we say 10%, that doesn't preclude anybody from asking for a minor amendment, does it not? Just a clarification.
Mr. Pitt.
That is correct. Certainly whatever ultimately gets implemented in the zoning bylaw, property owner would have the right to apply for a minor variance.
Okay, so maybe I need a little bit of clarification on that. So how does that affect what we're talking about, whether we put this in or not? I'm a little unclear on that now.
I think, and thank you, I'll expand on that a little bit. I think the change that we're debating, as I say right now, those especially who sit on the Committee of Adjustment know minor variance application to allow a lot coverage of 11% is probably our most common application. And coincidentally, almost all the lot coverage applications come in exactly at 11%. And they're regularly approved because the official plan recognizes that we can consider approvals up to that amount. I think the change that's proposed would certainly go to, like I say, a less prescriptive, more typical official plan that would allow consideration of the characteristics of the lot in question. And potentially we would see less applications exactly at 11, but potentially open the door for applications that could exceed 11%. It would have to be reviewed on its merits. I think if hopefully we can sort of come to a quick agreement, whether we like the very strict sort of 11% and close the door at that, and we can have continue the existing policies. As Mr. Clark noted, very clear, the 11% may be appropriate, but it shall not be exceeded, or whether we wish to review the applications more on their own merits and have a bit more flexibility before the Committee of Adjustment when those applications come in.
Thank you. That was very helpful for me. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. My question would be to David through you. I guess I was actually wondering, I'm not sure if this is the time, but that 1% that we generally offer up, I guess I don't see too many times that we turn it down, but I actually was also wondering if that could be a staff decision in many cases. And again, I just like to have a little bit further dialogue on that, because for the number of years that I've been around the table, it doesn't seem very often that we turn this down. And you're right, that we don't get many over the 11%. But just wondering if David could comment on that. Thank you.
Well, Councillor Nishikawa, I'm actually going to put that into the new category because I don't think that affects what we're dealing with today in terms of whether it's a staff delegation or not. So can we move that into we'll talk about it at the end, so that we can stay focused on what we're doing here. So Member Lundell.
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. I'm wondering if I could ask our consultants what would be the advantage to this wording that is proposed. I understand that owner would have the opportunity to go for a minor variance, And I guess a second part to that question is, how do we determine what is minor? Because I know we use that phrase throughout the official plan.
It's a great question, and we're certainly into a very meaty issue as issue number 1 today. So this is great. I think it kind of sets the tone for how this day is going to go. So that's fantastic, because these are very important issues and important questions. So just so everyone's clear, this 1/10 permission, or the 10% permission, only applies to lot coverage applications, and it basically establishes 11% as the maximum the township will accept. And if somebody wants more than that, then they have to amend the official plan. And as David indicated, that hasn't happened, and 11% has become the de facto. From my perspective, when I looked at this policy, I thought it seemed a little too prescriptive for an official plan to establish a numerical cap on how far the township's willing to go with respect to an application for a variance. So I didn't include it. So the pros of not including it is that there is more flexibility afforded to folks on a case-by-case basis to apply for more. And there is more flexibility afforded to the township in considering such an application. So that's the pro. The con is that you may end up with applications proposing more than what the community standard has been for quite a period of time in the township, and that may be perceived as a negative. And if Mr. Pink is, well, I'm sure he's correct, but if based on Mr. Pink's comments about everyone lives with the 11%, then maybe it is a good idea to carry it forward, because that has become the community standard in terms of the acceptability of an increase. And if everyone is okay with that, perhaps it should stay in the plan, and it becomes one of those cornerstone policies I spoke of earlier that everyone believes should be carried forward because they have worked and they are believed to continue working in the future. So it really comes down to that. Is this a cornerstone policy that folks believe is important? And if it is, I can certainly get behind it as well, because it is a community standard that has been established and appears to work in your township.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I don't have a problem leaving it at 10% with a 10% increase to make it to 11%. You know, when I was first on the Committee of Adjustment before I was on council, the recommendation was to turn it down after 10%, because that was in the official plan. Somewhere along the way that got dropped, and now it's just an automatic give them 11%. If we went back to the old rule where they had to prove they needed the extra 1%, that would help, and that leave it up to the Committee of Adjustment or the planning in that department at that time. And that's so I would like to see it left in. It gives some wiggle room. We've been fortunate at LPAT with this, so I would not change it, because if you take it to the 10%, somebody's going to be asking for 12, and that's it. So we're looking for the environment first, and overbuilding Earth's environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Scolati. David?
Thank you, Chair. I guess I would feel comfortable leaving it at 11%, but I just so I understand the scale that we're talking about, because of course there are big lots and small lots. What is the typical size of a dwelling that people want to build, or lot coverage that people want to build? Are we talking about 2,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet, or what is just the typical number that we're looking at? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pink, is there a typical number?
The chair, I think that's really hard to pinpoint. Obviously, there's such a variation of lot sizes in our township. It is extremely variable, as we heard from the other speakers. Sometimes we're dealing with existing very small properties, and we do get a lot of lot coverage requests on those because the coverage is less so on very large properties, but it can vary from a 10,000 square foot lot to a 10-acre lot, and everything in between. And it's So it certainly does vary. I get the sense there seems to be a desire to retain the current policy. I think we can do that with a simple sort of nodding of heads. I think I can also speak to Mr. McDonald about perhaps inserting some additional language that doesn't imply as if 11% is a given either. And that's really speaks to Councillor Edwards' earlier comments. In the past, the planning department had a rule that we would never support any lot coverage. When I became director, I said, just because it's 10 or 10.1, that shouldn't be the trigger. We need to look at every development and make a recommendation based off what's appropriate for that property. So that, I think, is hence Mr. McDonald's going away from the strict 11, but I think it does serve the municipality well. I think we can just expand on it to review each application on its merit. You may be permitted up to 11, but 11 shouldn't be seen as a given right either. And we try our best to do that before the Committee of Adjustment. So I see some nodding of heads. Perhaps just in the interest of time, we can move back to the lot creation, I think was.
Are we good? Well, I had two more people on this. So quickly, Mayor Harding, have you got something
Excuse
new
me,
to add?
No, I support where Director Pink's going. And I think just the reality is, let's not create problems with this OP that don't exist today. And I think that's where we're heading down the road if this was to be implemented at this point. So I'm certainly happy to revert back to where we were. And when you allow me, I'll come back to my second question that kicked this off.
Thank you. So, Mr. Clark, have you got something new, or I think we're in agreement we're going to leave it as it stands?
Excuse me, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Maybe we could get a show of hands on that, because there's to confirm that that we want to do that.
I didn't know we were finished yet. So, okay.
Sorry.
I thought that I was trying to let everybody have a comment on that. But yes, we've got the show of hands, and I hear Mr. Pink. So I'm going to think that, Mr. Clark, you were going to speak to that, but if we're past that now and that's okay with you, only I see your hand up again, so please.
Yeah, actually, I was moving on to lot creation minimum, so I'm fine with the group.
That's where we're going. So that's good, because I'm going to come back to Member Arnie's question. I promised her I would do that, which was the frontage, the increase in the frontage, and then we'll go to Mayor Harding's second question and Mr. Clark's second question. So who would like to answer? Okay, Mr. Pink, if you would like to take that.
I think perhaps it might have been Member Lundell that asked the question, but I could be wrong, and it was a little time ago, so perhaps I don't recall it exactly, but I think the question was regarding the going from 60 meters to 90 meters, 200 feet to 300 feet. I think all I can say, generally speaking, is obviously that's a very strict lot frontage requirement across the province. That's one of the more stringent, but I'm not saying that it's necessarily inappropriate. I think in my experience, particularly on the big lakes, we rarely see 200-foot lots created that much anymore. I'm not saying it doesn't occur, but there's such a strong desire for two-story boathouses that most new lots lately have been in the 300 feet already. With respect always to the infamous question about LPAT, it's extremely difficult to answer those types of questions without the details. And obviously it's going to depend on the character of the area, the size of lots in that area, what lake it's on, and the features and characteristics of the property. But it should be noted that the district official plan continues to retain a 60-meter requirement. So it wouldn't be unprecedented for an OPA at our level to go back under the 90 meters if that proposal did come forward. And again, we'd have to review that on its merits. But one of the clear policy directions was to increase the frontage requirements from our minimums of 200 feet, which have been in place for many, many years. And Mr. McDonald has done so and simply raised them by as I say, currently 200, 300, and 400 have been our standards, depending on topography and narrowness of a lake. He simply increased those to 300, 400, and 500. And I don't think he got to island properties, but the same principle from 300 to 400 and an increase in acreage as well. So hopefully that helps provide a bit of background, and interested to hear the discussion and any other questions.
Thank you. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. I guess my comment or question, number one, from a steep slopes perspective, we're getting some pretty large lots. And I think the reality that's going on, the level flat lots are already built on and already developed. So anything new that's going to be developed are probably the least favorable. Are we encouraging some blasting? I know we're trying to deal with that at a later date or not, when we trying to say you've got to have super big lots. I'm struggling with that. There's significant differences in those size of lots. The other thing I'll say from the change from 60 to 90 meters, Mr. Pink, I agree that most people are doing a 300-foot lot or a 90-meter lot already because they may want a 2-story boathouse. The other thing, you know, again, are we creating more problems? Because we've seen developments where they are entitled to a lot creation of 200 feet. The public all push back and we end up with 300 or 400-foot lots. I'll take Mary Jane Lake for one. And the public push back and we push the developer back, and all of a sudden we end up with 400 and 500-foot lots. They're okay with that. I guess the question is, if we go to a 90-meter lot and the public pushes back, is the minimum lot going to be 600-foot lots or 700-foot lots? So I just wonder, again, are we creating more problems in this than we really are solving at the end of the day? So, you know, I think the market sort of dictates on the larger lakes. They're going to want a 300-foot lot because they may want a 2-story boathouse. And I think, you know, I'm just cautious that we are, for the lot that's maybe only 275 feet, and that's where he's got a 575-foot lot and wants to create 2 of them. He can only create 1. He only gets 1 lot. So that's sort of my high level comments. So I guess I can leave it to committee's discussion.
Okay, thank you. Now, what I'd like to do is stay on what Mayor Harding is talking about, if there's any other comments on that before I move on to Member Clark. So, Member Lundell, you have a comment on that?
Thank you, Chair Bridgman. Well, I know we do have an expert on realty here on our committee, and I just was going to ask whether do most clients coming through right now want a 90-meter frontage, and if so, I don't have any problem with instituting this. I think it is preferable in terms of lake system health and in terms of preserving natural heritage areas.
Okay, so Mr. Clark, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I don't know why we changed the policy at all. I don't know how much opportunity we have to create lots other than islands. There aren't a heck of a lot of properties out there that even would qualify for subdivision at this point. Severance. I think in the current market, which is has been unique but expected to go for some time, I think people are desperate to find anything on the lake. This is no longer about, you know, 300 and 400 and 200-foot lots. There's really no way to get on from an affordability point of view. There's so many things tied up in this discussion. And I think that's the problem with each of these points. They lead to so many other possible sequences of events. And if you look at the current scenario, you know, I believe it's worked well. I believe if we start implementing some of the other things that we've talked about for lot creation, again, instead of telling people what they can do, we need to create the bylaws, et cetera, to explain what exactly we're willing to allow them to do. So when we talk, you know, Phil's talking about blasting on steep slopes. You know, I think a lot of that severance application could come down to, look, it has to be 300 feet because of the steepness of this lot, and there's nowhere flat to build. And why do we want this guy blowing the lake up at 60 feet or at 100 feet? But I will tell you, every single time that we do a lot frontage increase, you know, on one hand, I want to thank you for the increase in my property value. And on the other hand, you know, we're locking people out of this market and we're stopping people from being able to create a succession plan that their grandparents created for them. And now they're trying to create for their kids. And we really stop them from being able to, move that along through generations. And I think if we do stormwater management, et cetera, that we've talked about, then we can look at site specific. And I think David and his team are very well equipped. It's very challenging to create lots these days. So I would vote that we don't change anything in this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Scalati.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I want to start by saying I agree wholeheartedly with what Bob just commented on. And my major concern, and first of all, I should say, I love the concept of larger lots. It keeps the neighbors further away, which reduces a lot of the concerns we have about noise from the neighbors, and certainly helps preserve lake health. But it also is a socioeconomic issue, and particularly on the smaller lakes where people with less money tend to go. The larger the lot is, the more or the less affordable it is. And I think we have to be aware that that's something that that we would be contributing to if we make our lots even bigger. They can only be afforded by those who can afford them. Thank you.
Hey, Lori, Member Thompson. It's that darn button, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I am working on a new technology today that I haven't used before. I'm in favor of this increased lot size for severance. As Liz Lundell said, and actually as Mr. Scalati said as well, it means lower impact on the environment, and in general, less vegetation overall is going to be removed. And so that helps with the stormwater management. And so it helps in our implementing the vision that we have heard from the community, that we want to protect our lakes. And at some point, we're going to have to decide how much development is enough development on our lakes. And so I'm very thankful to the previous councils that decided that we should increase our lot sizes from 100 to 200. And it's not just because I'm further away from my neighbors, but it's because if we had 100-foot lots, I think that it would be too much for our watershed to sustain, especially given what's happening with climate change. We've heard very, very emphatically from the scientists and from the environmental community, from the Muskoka Watershed Council, that we need to make sure that we protect our lakes. And one of the best ways to do that is dealing with the stormwater management and retaining as much vegetation as we can, and having larger lot sizes will undoubtedly help in that regard. If we still had the 100-foot lot sizes, we'd be in a lot of trouble right now, a lot more trouble than we're in now. And also, it does help to mitigate the effect of those TVs that people like to have in their boathouses down on the lake when they happen to be your neighbor.
Okay, thank you. I just had a quick comment. This would be only new lot creation. So all those people that own lots that are 200 feet are going to be able to sell those lots at 200 feet. I just want to make sure that even anybody listening in understands that too. It's as Bob said, it's not a huge part of our quote market at this point. Member Lundell.
Thank you. I just wanted to support what Member Thompson has just said. I mean, we are looking at a 25-year official plan. This is a long-term document. I was encouraged to hear from Mr. Clark that we really don't have that many lots of 400 feet anyway. Property values are going to continue to increase over the next 25 years. And so I think what we should be doing is trying to guarantee that the value of our properties remain high because of the quality of lifestyle and the lakes and the health of the lakes and natural environment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you very much. The way it's written now with the 90 meters, 120 and 150, I think we should leave that in for now. When we go out to the public, they're going to tell us what they want. And so we're just suggesting at this point. It's better for the environment. We've had pushback on lake carrying capacity. Well, if you have larger lots, there won't be as many boats on the lake. So I would leave it the way it is for now and see what the public say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Mr. Clark speak, and then I'm going to see if I can get a consensus here on where we're going on this. And your hand just came down, Bob. Would you like to speak again?
Yep. No, I just want to make sure we stay on point. I mean, we kind of go down these misleading areas. There are no 100-foot lots there. You can't create a 100-foot lot. So talking about, bringing 100-foot lots in, they're set in stone, they're done. Every time we move these things along though, we're taking away rights that people have. And in this particular case, I think it actually gives somebody food for thought that actually potentially, depending on where we go with all this, does give them a choice on the environment. We're saying, oh, we don't want more 200-foot lots, but we also don't want 3-story or 2-story boathouses. Somebody's got to make a decision. Do they want their kid to live next door and subdivide that property so that can happen into a 200-foot lot? Or do they want their 2-story boathouse? And the reality is, there's going to be people on this committee that don't want them to have either. So I think we, we better be careful. You close the door here, now we come along and say, oh yeah, we also don't want, boathouses and stuff either. So, so that's the problem with how these things all play together.
Okay, so Councillor Hayes, I know you haven't had a chance to speak, then I'll get my straw vote going here.
Okay, thank you. Just touching on a point that Bob Clark made with succession planning. Should I hear in the wind that my 600-foot lot that I was planning to leave to my 3 children, now I would only be able to leave to 2 children and they'd have to duke it out. Before this plan came into fruition, I would apply for a severance to ensure that I had those 3 lots. That would mean in the future, should my children decide not to move up here, I'm now putting 3 lots into the pool of ownership rather than 1 lot. So I think it's a gamble which way you go. But I think that taking away people's rights is always difficult.
Okay, so I am going to ask if I can get maybe a raised hand. At this point in time, will we be leading in what the direction that we gave, which is increased lot coverage? All those in favor? Madam Clerk, are you?
That is 9 with their hands raised. So
all
9.
against?
That was the consensus to do that.
That was 6. So you're on
Sorry,
mute.
9 in favor.
So that carries. So that's where, at this point in time, we're going to leave it in to Councillor Edwards' comment. We'll hear from the public on this. So, all right, Mr. McDonald, there's your answer to that one.
We're not even through the first A in the first policy direction. So, but a lot of we've just talked about a lot here, and I just wanted to reflect on one thing that Mayor Harden brought up about steep slopes, which we didn't talk about. And I'd like to ask Jim Dyment just to make a comment about that, because there is an issue with steep slopes that factored into our suggestions for increased lot frontages in those circumstances. Mr. Dyment?
Thanks, Mr. McDonald. I hope you can see me and everything's fine. One of the issues with steep slopes that people forget about is it's not just the environmental impact and the potential for increased erosion with vegetation removal. The construction is very difficult and very invasive on the natural environment. But at the end of the day, it's almost impossible to mitigate the visual impact of buildings that are on a steep slope, because when you look at them in relation to the waterfront themselves, you can't avoid in many instances, unless you impose other restrictions on the height of the building or the size of the building. It's very difficult to mitigate the environmental impact. And if the objective is to ensure that the natural visual characteristics of the shoreline dominate over human-built form, then you have to spread that human-built form out over a broader area in order to ensure that the natural landscape dominates. And that's part of the rationale for requiring much wider, larger frontages in areas where there's steep slopes.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Dyment. That's very helpful. I just wanted to make sure we addressed Mayor Harding's comment about steep slopes. And since we're there, the next section in the lot creation section also deals with narrow water bodies. And we also increase the lot frontages there as well. Mr. Dyment, would you care to comment on that too?
Mr. Dyment?
Yeah, I'm working on that. Yeah, in terms of the narrow water bodies, I think the same issue arises. We have a concern about the density of boat traffic on the water bodies and the ability of people to navigate in narrow water bodies. Also, I think that one of the things that people have talked about through this process, and I'm sure we'll talk about more, is not only the visual, but also the noise impacts of development near the water. And of course, we know that it carries across the water. And so in narrow water bodies, we have far more impact, not just on the water itself, but on the shore on the other side of the water body. And so we've increased the width for narrow water bodies and defined the narrow water bodies to try to mitigate that impact as well. I'll say one more thing and then I'll be quiet unless Mr. McDonald asks me again, is one of the things that we talk about through this process in many of our meetings, and I think Bob Clark has mentioned this morning, is all of the good stuff is already developed. And so what we're dealing with now is development and redevelopment of properties that are not easily developed. And I think it requires an additional level of caution when we're dealing with it. And so that's why some of these numbers have increased.
And I would echo Mr. Dyment's comments as well. I certainly look at the changes we're making from a couple of different perspectives. One being you're establishing as a council the character that you're wanting to maintain, protect, or establish in a valuable resource area, which is your lakes. So that's number one. So once you establish that community character, and you're being consistent in how it's being applied, it is certainly more defensible than if you didn't. And then secondly, and building upon what Mr. Dyment just said, certainly when you require larger lot frontages, there's much more of an ability to manage and mitigate environmental risk. To some extent, there's a precautionary approach being applied as a consequence. So those are all the reasons why the increased lot frontages are occurring in our view as planners. And I certainly agree with Councillor Edwards' direction that let's see what the public has to say when we go out and get that feedback. And we can certainly have further discussions on this as we go forward. But just wanted to close that loop so that we can move on. I do see Mr. Harding's hand up though, or Mayor Harding's hand.
Mayor Harding?
Thank you. And I agree with sort of growing the size of the lots in these. I'm happy to provide a comment right now on E443B2, which is no lot creation. And I'm not sure where these lots exist or not. I would have a struggle with no new lot creation. I don't mind an increase in size, but I would literally struggle in stopping someone's lot creation. For those on council, well, remember we created some lots to be actually almost acting as a waterfront landing in a small narrow water body near the Joe River recently. Was a large wide piece of property, and we did allow a second. We made them larger lots. We controlled the dock widths and everything else, but it was a good opportunity for someone to be able to access their island property. And I know we're going to get to that section maybe in 3 weeks by the time we get there at this rate. But talking about deeded mainland property, and then eventually we just run out of land. So I'm happy just to comment that I'm good with increased lot sizes, but I'm not good with no new lots.
Mr. McDonald?
It's a good point, because at the present time, if your frontage is less than 75 meters, then you couldn't create a new lot. Now we're increasing that to 120. So I guess it's along the lines of all of the other changes we're making. And essentially, wherever there is a minimum lot frontage requirement in your official plan on the water, we're increasing it. So that was the direction we got. If there's a desire to modify that approach, that's fine. We would need that direction at some point. I would suggest we leave it all as is and we come back to that. And quite frankly, if there's a desire to modify one of the 10 places we've changed it, that's fine. Because it's a more of a unique circumstances, and narrow water bodies may be a good example. With that being said, just to sort of complete the circle on the lot creation, the next section deals with water access lots. And there is another policy direction that deals with the tying of that lot in title to whatever other property is being tied to. Let's leave that for a moment. But what I wanted to indicate is that the lot frontage for water access lots has also been increased in this draft as well, from 90 to 120 meters, along the same lines of what I just went through. So everywhere there's a number, we increased it. That's the direction we got, and that's what we've implemented. And until such time as we're directed to do something different. And again, these are character issues. So as a planner, you're the ones that establish the character of the community through, your direction, and character is very subjective, and we're good with that. So if there's direction to change that, that's fine. If we see an issue with you picking and choosing and not being consistent, we'll let you know. Right now, everything's increasing, easy to defend. Once you start picking some out and say, well, let's increase here, but not here, then it becomes harder to defend, because then you're making judgment calls that may be different from one area to another. Just leave that there. So moving forward in the lot creation section, the backlot development is the only last piece. And because there is no water frontage involved here, we did not increase the frontages required for backlot lots. So they still are 200 meters frontage and 2 hectares in land area. So we really haven't changed those policies. So that's the full package on lot creation. I'm hoping there are no other questions, but I do see Mr. Clark's hand up.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, just one question on water access. Did I read somewhere in here that would be creating a lot would be tied to having a deeded mainland access?
That is correct, and that is actually another policy direction that we can come to later. I am aware that a comment was provided from someone on that point. Very well written, I should say. Some food for thought for us to think about. I would suggest leaving that conversation for when we get to that policy direction. That's fine. We'll stick with the law creation for now.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. We're talking backlot development, waterfront properties that are considered waterfront in the waterfront designated. And my concern, which I'll bring up more under the rural area, is what I see is the moonscaping on properties. And so it's, I want to specifically talk about backlots, and I'm wondering if this, if we can somehow protect an applicant from first going in and cutting down every tree and blasting away everything property border to property border without having a permit to do so, because they don't have a plan of what they're doing. And that's just, as Mr. Dyment was saying, that's just what really causing all kinds of problem with runoff and stuff like that, not to mention view. So I'd like some discussion on that.
So, Mr. McDonald, would you consider this a new direction that we want to put on our list, or would you prefer to do it now?
I think that could be a new direction, and we can perhaps think about that in advance of when we talk about it, because clearly the focus of the current policy framework in your OP and what we've done here is on the waterfront lots. Lots of different rules. You can do this, you can't do this. Backlot development, it's a little different, and there certainly isn't that level of effort in your current OP about restrictions on those properties. And we can certainly consider applying some of the thinking to the water frontage lots to the back lots as well, in terms of minimum or maximum site alterations and lot coverage controls as well too. So food for thought. That would be a new direction though, and I suggest we leave that for the end. Okay, so we've gone through lot frontage and lot creation. So the second key type of development that occurs on their lakes is the development on the vacant lots, and that's in section E4.5. And this is still implementing the lake system health direction that we received. So again, there's the requirement for the soil study and the requirement to ensure that the soils are the right kinds to retain phosphorus when redevelopment occurs as well. And there is also the monitoring requirements. So it's the same requirements would apply if you're redeveloping your property as it would if you're creating a new lot. So the idea is to make it the same. There is an existing undersized lot provision in this section that is fairly much the same as in your existing official plan. There is a minimum below which in your zoning bylaw that development cannot occur. So that's basically being carried forward. With respect to islands that are less than 0.8 hectares in size, we've carried forward that policy. Mr. Pink, I think, alluded to us not dealing with lot sizes on islands, and perhaps Mr. Pink could just refresh us on where perhaps we can go on that, because we did not include it in this draft. Mr. Pink?
Mr. Pink, please.
Sorry, Mr. McDonald, could you just repeat that question again?
Yeah, you had indicated that we had not included a minimum lot size on islands, and
just making notes here.
Right, that's fine. I was too, and that was something we didn't include or we missed somewhere. I just wanted to make sure I got that right from you.
No, sorry. If you could just repeat what you wish me to clarify. Sorry, I missed the beginning part of your comments.
Okay.
I was just making notes.
Sorry about that. You had indicated earlier that we had not increased the lot frontages or sizes on islands, and I'm just wanting to make sure I got that right.
No, I apologize. I think I indicated we did. Like you said, I think we consistently through, whether it's a narrow water body, a steep slope, or other lakes, including islands, we increase. So currently on an island property, the minimum frontage is 300 feet. I believe in the current draft that has been increased to 400 feet.
Thank you very much.
What I would comment to provide a little bit of background, I think Mr. Clark mentioned it as well. We've had a lengthy discussion on lot frontage, and I would agree there's not that many properties on the mainland left on our big three lakes with extensive lot creation potential. But one area that does, and you've probably heard me say this, is on island properties. There's certainly significant development potential remaining on those, particularly on Lake Joseph. In my experience, we can increase the lot frontage. That's typically not the limiting factor on island properties. It's acreage is the limiting factor on island properties. So I think we want to talk about the lot size, and my imperial metric conversions are not the greatest, but I think we've increased that as well. It's proposed to be 1 hectare, and I think current requirement is 2 acres. So I think there's a slight increase there. So you might want to focus a little more on the lot area with island properties. It tends to be more restrictive.
Great, thanks for that, David. Councillor Edwards, I believe, has his hand up.
Councillor Edwards?
Yes, thank you very much, and through the chair. On undersized lots, and I know some small lakes have the imperial 100-foot lots, and we're encouraging them to actually merge them. But if they don't want to merge them, is there any way we can put a restriction? Say if they're allowed 8% now, maybe they only get 4 or 5%. So we have smaller buildings on them. It's less of a thing. It may encourage people to then merge them, and that is just a thought. But I'd like to see us do something on that, because there was a lot of lots that were created years ago that maybe you shouldn't be built on, but we can't stop actual development rights. But maybe we could restrict some of it. Thank you.
Do you want to comment, Mr. McDonald?
I think I'll ask Mr. Pink to comment on that because I'm sure he's dealt with this operationally in the past.
Okay, Mr. Pink.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I'm not familiar with the area. If there's a specific area that you're referring to, my initial thoughts are, I mean, we could certainly talk about a policy that tries to encourage lot mergers or restrictions on new development. But in my experience, I think you're going to be very hard pressed to convince the landowner to take away significant rights. There's significant value in each individual property, and I don't think, no matter how encouraging the policy are, I think we're not going to be overly successful in getting people to merge their properties unless it's on their own accord in order to gain some additional concessions. But perhaps if more specifics are provided, I can provide some more background or clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Yes, the specific example would be on Little Long Lake within the old township. I forget what it was called, but they created 50-foot lots, if I'm not mistaken. And no, 100, any small lots. And that lake, as all is aware, many are aware, it's the most threatened lake in Muskoka. So they need to do something to protect a species there or an animal. And so that's the example, David.
Thank you. Sorry. Through the chair, I thought that might be the case. I think our discussion right now is on lot creation and the frontages associated with that. I think the issue that's referred to on Little Long Lake is existing lots. And there is a policy. Perhaps we can get to that later when we go section by section. But that is a long-standing policy and also a long-standing zoning bylaw provision since the 80s to recognize existing lots to a minimum frontage of 100 feet. I think it's based on the premise that prior to 1987, a 100-foot lot was the standard. I think you may, again, receive some fairly considerable feedback from the public if you look to take away those rights to develop on 100-foot lots. Because they are quite common on a number of our lakes, not just Little Long Lake, Lake Muskoka. A number of lakes contain 100-foot properties. That was the standard for many, many years. And our zoning bylaw, for lack of a better term, grandfathers those and does permit development on a 100-foot lot. But again, I think that's a discussion and a later policy. Right now, we're just looking at, I thought it was lot creation, frontage and acreage on water access properties, E444, page 54 of the new OP.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm going to Mayor Harding on E444, whatever. Staying on topic, Mayor Harding.
Yeah, well, and then I really won't comment. I just my high level comment that we're talking about forcing people to merge lots and everything else. You know, I'm if I have double the size of the lot and I'm at a 6% lot coverage, I'm still going to get 6% of double the lot. It's not really taking down more trees or not. It's still 6% lot coverage on a half-acre lot or an acre lot if we merge two lots together. So I'm just cautious as to where we go. And you know, again, I'm still struggling with the deeded title to mainland property on the water access lots E444, and I'll flag that up front as for further discussion. Thanks.
Okay, so yes, we're going to put that into the queue with the where it belongs in the policy directions then. So I think we can go on, Mr. McDonald, but it is 10:30. Would you like to take a 10-minute break?
I think a 10-minute break would be appropriate. We're almost done this piece, the redevelopment on existing lots. It's basically very straightforward. There are components that come up in later policy directions, but I think now is a good time.
Sorry, it is 10:33 on my clock, so if we can get back at 10:43, that would be great. So we're taking a short break. If we could please have everybody come back. Okay, we're just waiting for quorum here. Everybody back? Most back? We just we need our clerks, so we'll just wait a couple more minutes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
you have a quorum on both committees if you want to start.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. All right, we will resume then, and I believe it is back to you, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, it is, Chair Bridgeman. And just to finish off this first item and the first item on the first page of what we're working on, there's policies on the redevelopment of existing lots, section E4.6. And simply put, what these policies also require is the soil survey as well, and the enhanced soils, which is a requirement when you're creating new lots and for development of vacant lots. So it's the same thing all the way through for all three types of lots. I know there is something in this section that deals with the grandfathering issue, but that's in the next item. So I wanted to close that door and move on to item B in our policy direction. And that item B, and I'm just going to jump in, is include policies that direct the updated zoning bylaw to include updated and more restrictive provisions on lot coverage and required yards and setbacks. So we've done a few things to implement that. Firstly, in section E4.6, which deals with the redevelopment of existing lots, as I mentioned in the overview I presented last time, we did take a stab at dealing with the grandfathering issue, which to some extent implements this policy direction as well. And we have indicated in the middle here that if you're within the 20-meter setback, you are allowed to increase the amount of floor area by 10%, provided you're not any closer than 15 meters. And you're also permitted to develop a second story. These are typically, these kinds of standards are typically seen in a zoning bylaw, and perhaps that's the best place to have them. But we did take a stab at this. This is a reduction from the 20% that's currently permitted. So that's a halving of that permission. Clearly, if someone can't meet that new standard, they will then go through the minor variance process, and it gets dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So that's what we did there. And before I open it up for discussion, the next section deals with site alteration, which was also dealt with, I guess, in the context of this policy direction as well. And in this section, we reflect upon the existing site alteration bylaw and indicate that it needs to be updated. And then we indicate that in item C, that there is a new standard for site alteration within 60 meters of the shoreline, and it shall not exceed 25% of the area of the lot. So this is very new in your bylaw, and that the impervious surface of the total property, and this includes not only the piece within 60 meters, but all of it will not exceed 10%. And then in item E, we included all of those items we discussed during the policy direction discussion in terms of what would be counted in all of that moving forward. There is another policy, I can't remember exactly where it is now, but there is direction to also look at updating standards in the bylaw as well, but there is no specific recommendation on what those updated standards should be. So to some extent, we've implemented that policy direction by putting in a more restrictive permission for properties that have houses within 20 meters, and we've recommended a new site alteration and impervious surface standard for consideration as well. So that's how we've implemented that component of the policy direction. Any discussion or questions?
Yes, I see Mayor Harding.
Thank you. And I'll be honest, so there's two things. Those people who've been on council for a while will recognize and remember that when we implemented the current zoning bylaw, 2014-14, we actually put policies in for the first time to deal with the expansion. And that was the 20% allowable, which already took away a number of people's rights to sort of control that. And when we have a small property, let's say there's 1,000 square foot cottage, and they really want to add a 200 square foot room, we've basically been able to allow that. And that's the impetus behind that 20% expansion. I think truly, and I will say, I would not be support, first of all, in putting this in a official plan, number one. Number two, I think, we haven't even been for 5 years, so to speak, on 2014-14 by the time it got implemented. And the 20% has already got significant reductions. When we say people have got to move back, we're going to, I got to get rid of my 1,000 square feet. I now need to move 1,000 square feet to 66 feet back, and I'm clearly going to take down far more trees. I think our zoning bylaw is already quite restrictive in that current 20% expansion. And I wouldn't be further reducing it to only a 10% expansion. And especially not in the zoning bylaw. So that's my perspective on this.
So Bob, Mr. Clark.
So I'm completely against, I'm with Phil. I think the 20% is already, if people actually followed that bylaw, we'd have some of the ugliest cottages that have ever been built. You end up with single story buildings in the first 35 to 50 feet, and then 2-story buildings in the back. I think David can comment that this probably creates a huge amount of applications for minor variances and zoning bylaw amendments because you really can't build anything that meets the current requirement. So I'd actually be encouraging loosening this up as it relates to, because as Phil said, if we're thinking about the environment, why are we pushing people back and cutting more mature trees down and changing the whole stormwater management part of it? I don't know why, although I'll be honest with you, I think I remember agreeing to a cap on non-permeable surfaces. That being said, if we're now going to go to the environmental experts and say, in this particular case, I think we're saying a redevelopment of a lot would trigger site plan approval. Nick, I'll have you weigh in on that, but I think that's what we said, which I think is ludicrous. We handle 100 of them right now, and this would, I believe David had mentioned, it would trigger roughly 700 a year. Which means I'll long be retired by the time I get another building permit. The reality is we don't have the system or the ability to do that. And there's all kinds of things that we can talk about related to community planning, et cetera, that might alleviate that. But, you know, you're taking a huge amount of people's property rights away. If you go down the path of making us go to a stormwater management and a site plan approval on each of these items, then why are you capping us? Why don't you let on anything? Why don't you let the environmentalist and the environmental consultants say, you know, that driveway's okay to pave if you put catch basins here and direct the water there, and go ahead and put your tennis court in. I mean, we keep trying to tell people how they should enjoy their time in Muskoka based on how you did. That is not what the new people are looking for. So that's my input. I'm not supportive of either of these.
Okay, thank you. Patricia?
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. I think what I would like to do is circle back to Councillor Roberts' concern about site alteration on backlots. This is site alteration on existing, but the assumption is developed lots, because in my understanding, so far, we still don't have any control over what people do on vacant lots unless they apply for a permit to do something. So this, is there another section that would address that, or is that put in the parking lot as well as Councillor Roberts' concern?
I can probably provide a quick answer to assist. So the site alteration numbers that we're suggesting would apply to any lot. So a newly developed lot, a vacant lot, or a lot that is already developed and is in the process of being redeveloped. If we include a site alteration cap in the zoning bylaw, then folks would be restricted from modifying their properties, even if they don't need a building permit. So for example, if they start paving a property to put in multiple tennis courts, they don't really need a permit from the township, but there would be a provision in the bylaw that restricts the amount of paving you can have on a property. It's kind of a new approach, because technically it's your site alteration bylaw that deals with this. And we're suggesting that it perhaps be in your site alteration bylaw, but also in your zoning bylaw as well. So it would apply to every waterfront lot going forward. And obviously the easiest way to implement these provisions is if somebody's applying for a building permit, or is requiring a site plan agreement, or is requiring a minor variance. Then it's very simple. The ones that are more challenging will always be, no matter what we do, are those folks who don't need an approval from the township. They don't walk in the door saying, we want to do this and this, what can we do? They just go out and do it. That's always going to be a challenge. So keep that in mind as we develop numbers. Those numbers work when they're implementable. And they're not always implementable just because of the way things happen on the ground. Don't know if that's helpful or not, but.
Thank you. Supplemental?
Of course.
Thank you. All right. That is the issue that I'm concerned about. Are you aware of any other OP or zoning, or I guess bylaw, it wouldn't be a zoning bylaw, that would handle being able to deal with site alteration that we all see happening, that isn't appropriate, but there's been no application and there's no way of preventing it. Are you aware of other mechanisms to address that?
Well, I think, and I'll ask Mr. Pink to weigh in as well. I think it's I guess there's three sort of ways you get at it. One is you update your site alteration bylaw to make it as strong and tough as possible. So what we're suggesting in this section is that the township do just that, and to think through clearly what is site alteration, what are people exempt from requiring a permit to do on their particular property, because you have to think through that very clearly. So updating your site alteration bylaw, in my view, is key. The second thing you do is you include standards within your zoning bylaw that complement what the site alteration bylaw does as well. So you have two ways to sort of get at the same issue. And then the third way you deal with the issue, of course, is through an approval process. They apply for a minor variance, they apply for a consent, or they require site plan approval. You can codify these requirements and permissions through those approvals as well. So it's a combination of those three things working together that gets at it. I would still say, though, that the site alteration bylaw is the key bylaw in this particular case, because you can include some more subjective provisions in that bylaw than perhaps you can in a zoning bylaw. Perhaps Mr. Pink, you can weigh in on that.
Mr. Pink?
Thank you, Chair. I think that was an excellent description of the tools at our disposal, Mr. McDonald. I just wanted to clarify a few things. Stepping back, we were talking about front yard setbacks. I just want committee to understand currently what the zoning bylaw is 20%, but it's 20% within 35 to 50 feet. Beyond 50 feet, there's no limit. What the current draft, just so we're very clear, it is 10%, so it is a halving of that, but it's also 10% at 50 feet. So it eliminates 35 to 50 altogether. So just please be cognizant of that. So fairly substantial change there. Just to refresh your memories, we had a lengthy discussion on this at the policy direction stage. And at one point, the policy direction was to eliminate grandfathering altogether. So this is sort of the middle ground because the committee did backtrack from that. The only thing I would comment on the current mayor's right, it's only been in place for about 5 years. What I can say, I think it's extremely complicated on the community, and Mr. Clark probably can confirm that in the construction industry, that provisions currently in our bylaw on the 20% between 35 and 50 are quite complicated and technical, and you almost need a survey to calculate those. And it gets quite confusing for the community and even for staff to explain them. So it is a significant restriction what's proposed beyond that, but I think it simplifies it is perhaps one of the benefits. It's quite simple. 50 feet is your limit now, 10%. So instead of like a 3-tiered approach. With respect to the site alteration, I know in front of planning committee, we've had many discussions about the moonscaping. I did properties, and that's been a concern of the community and council, I believe, over the years, and that's where this is coming from. I believe I did want to jump in earlier with the question about the backlots. The way I read this draft, it's of any waterfront area property. I take that in the waterfront designation, which could apply to backlots. But if we can make that more explicitly clear quite easily, I think Mr. McDonald is correct. The principal tool is the site alteration bylaw. And the problem we are having now is there's nothing in the official plan, there's nothing in the zoning bylaw, and that would prohibit what I call sort of the excessive accessory buildings and what we're seeing. Everyone's developing their cottage, their 2-story boathouse, their garage, and then what we find up seeing are the extensive driveways, parking areas, tennis courts, pools, aerodromes, et cetera, et cetera. And there's no limit on that because the site alteration bylaw, if you obtain site plan approval, you're exempt. If you're developing beyond 200 feet, you're exempt. And when site plans come in for tennis courts, et cetera, we're obligated to approve of them. And then they're permitted to clear those areas. So we have very, very good buffers around our shoreline, but they're about 50 feet deep. I think the concern we're seeing is what happens beyond 66 feet and what happens beyond 200 feet. This was the direction, and I think Mr. McDonald's done a good job of trying to put a limit on it, suggesting 25% of all those permeable and impermeable surfaces. As we talked about before, our official plan and our zoning bylaw are extremely restrictive on lot coverage with the 10% and up to 11%. Where we are less holistically looking at it are those other areas where structures don't contain a roof, those patio areas, the tennis courts, the pools, and it's all those areas that are seeing that resulting in site alteration, and this is an attempt to control those. So interested to hear the feedback from the committee and the direction, but this was the policy direction to put a policy set around it, and I think Mr. McDonald has done so. Happy to hear if he's hit the sweet spot, or whether it's too restrictive, or perhaps we need more. But I think he's done a good job of explaining the tools. It will principally be the site alteration bylaw that needs to be amended to properly implement this. But we do in our zoning bylaw have in the waterfront landing zone a restriction on disturbed areas. But I can't say really it's accessory. There's very few waterfront landing zones in our township, but that was the attempt to control it because you see parking areas in waterfront landing zones, and we limit site alteration to 50% in those areas. This would be the first move to extend it to all waterfront zones.
I should have explained, thanks David for that. I should have explained a little bit more the rationale for the suggestion we made about the grandfathering. Yes, we did not carry forward any permission below the 15.235 feet, primarily for the reasons David just went through. But we did also recognize that to deal with that issue, you go through a minor variance process. And we think the minor variance process results in a different and possibly a better outcome than trying to pre-codify what you can do within that area. So that's one of the reasons why we thought of we remove that permission. With that being said, I see lots of hands up, so perhaps we can get some discussion.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. Every once in a while, I think I get to say something here besides chair. What we're talking about now are the biggest complaints I hear from my constituents, and I think that's why it's here. I want to leave it how it is to see what the rest of the public has to say, but it is the clear cutting. It is covering all our natural vegetation with other things that I have heard very loud and very clear. So I just wanted to throw my 2 cents worth in there. And then Councillor Edwards, it's your turn.
Well, it makes it easy, Chair Bridgeman, because I agree with you. I think we should leave it in, see what the public want. That's what we're here for. We're at the will of the public, and I would leave it in and see what they say. Thank you.
Thank you. Laurie, Member Thompson?
Yeah, well, I also agree with that, but I would, and we're not taking away people's developed property rights in this. We are telling them how to responsibly develop on their piece of property. We're not telling anyone that we're not going to say your cottage has to be smaller, your boathouse has to be smaller, your bunkie has to be smaller. You can still build those things, but you need to do it in a way that's responsible and respects the environment. And I think that we should, it's high time that we had some policies that limit what you can do on your site. And I think as well that we should look at what happens beyond the 200-foot mark, and not just the first 200 feet from the water, because the water actually feels what happens beyond the 200-foot mark, not just within it.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Dyment. I'm not sure if this is where some of the language gets tweaked or changed. Or sorry, Mr. McDonald, not Jim. Sorry.
I'm happy to deal with it.
It's good to see your face again. When I read section E, and it talks about the target for all permeable, non-permeable surfaces, a building, driveway, parking area to me is a non-permeable surface, and I appreciate that. I guess the question is, does that correspond to above C2, impervious, non-permeable, impervious surfaces? And I see that as a cap at 10%, which is basically lot coverage.
Yeah, I'll deal with that.
And I just, see, I was ahead of myself. I knew it was going to be you, Jim. But what I'm seeing is, you know, we're adding a whole bunch more things into lot coverage. And I just want to understand the difference between lot coverage at the 25% I buy into, but I'm just trying to understand that is everything included now in lot coverage?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will say in reread of this, it does need some wordsmithing because the purpose of it was that within the first 60 meters, the 25% coverage would apply. And that the rationale for that, of course, is that in the district plan, and we talk about preserving 75% of the vegetation within the shoreline buffer area. So what this is essentially does is extend that vegetation protection area to 60 meters. But the 10% wasn't to intended to provide for the whole lot. So if you think of, and I'll work on the wording, but the intent was not to restrict the entire lot to 10%. It was just to deal with those lots that go well beyond 60 meters, and how you deal with exactly what Councillor Roberts was talking about the clearing, and what Mr. Pink was talking about, the clearing and surfacing of things beyond that 60-meter point. So we need to tune that up a little bit to make that clear. And just by reference, when we were working on this stuff, I was looking for other examples of where this consideration has occurred. And I think if you look at the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, the language is similar. And why not protect the lakes of Muskoka as much as the Lake Simcoe?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mundell.
Thanks, and thanks for that explanation, Jim. Because we were told, of course, at the beginning of this that the consulting team would be taking a look at best practices. Simcoe is a great example. And when we look around at the other lower area municipalities in the District of Muskoka and even Seguin and Parry Sound, site plan control is a big deal. And it's a great tool. We've seen other municipalities use it very effectively. And I'm glad to think that we will be putting policy in place in our official plan that will allow us to do that as well when we get to site plan control bylaws.
Okay, so in terms of this, I see Bob, you'd like to speak?
I don't even know where to start, but look, I think we keep using this umbrella of protecting the environment with none of us being environmental experts. So we're making statements all the time of the things that we think and we've heard. I'd love at some point, 3 times I've asked, somebody tell me where a lake health plan is, or at least what's happening to our lake systems, because my understanding is they're improving. I understand there also seems to be a lot of people that are coming to you and saying, you know, stop this, stop that. We have a whole other different group of people that are saying, you know, if you're going to take away my right to sever my property, then I guess I'll put my kids on my property. So now I'm going to build a quotation mark storage building. Then you're talking about pushing people back from the lake, which again, I'm fully in support of. But if you actually think that the people that are moonscaping aren't going to moonscape because you move them back 100 feet instead of 66 or 50 feet, they're still going to do it. And in fact, it's responsible builders and realtors, et cetera, that explain the rules to them. And in many cases, force those people to go into and get their site plan signed off. But that doesn't stop the fact that damage was done. So, you know, the things that you're saying you're doing to try and improve the environment, and 200 feet back, it's okay. What are we doing to make sure that we don't disturb the view of the lake? Now you're 200 feet back, and what are we trying to improve what's happening in the bush? Like, who's looking back there? It's just, I don't know, like, how much control are we trying to get through here? And my concern, and remember, I'm actually aligned with many of the things that you're talking about. The challenge is you don't understand, I believe, and I'm not, being cynical or sarcastic. You're about to do what you did with boathouses in 2007. You're going to have the biggest run of building permits, severances, everything you're about to take away is going to drive behavior. And that behavior is going to create more problems for the lake health of this. And frankly, many people here, including myself, but many that are, promoting all of these stricter requirements, already have the things they're trying to take away, already are running their severances and subdivisions through because they know this is coming down the pipe. And we're getting all of the calls from the people who are starting to hear what we're about to do. And they're saying, let's get building, let's get severing, let's get all of this stuff going, and it's going to be a flood. So I'm just, be careful when you're telling them now what they can do 200 feet back and what they can do inside their buildings. I think the restrictive nature, again, is you're getting one side of the story. I'm not sure you're getting all the story.
I guess in response to that, I fully expect that folks will look at where the township is going, and there will be an increase in applications. That happens in every community where the policies or rules get more strict. And my quick answer to that is that's what happens, clearly. To a very large extent, what we're doing collectively by increasing standards or taking away as of right permissions is that we're forcing more development to go through a minor variance and site plan approval process than ever before. So that's where the big change will happen. We still anticipate that the types of development you see occurring today will still happen. It'll just be more difficult to obtain those approvals quickly because you need other things to happen, which allows the township and the property owner to have a conversation on a case-by-case basis to get the best outcome for that property. So to a very large extent, by making things more restrictive, we're forcing a process, and folks should realize that that's really what the end game is to bring more people into the planning department, have something in place that requires them to enter into agreements with the township to maintain their property in a certain way and do certain things and monitor and so on and so on. So collectively, that's what these changes are doing. And that will make Mr. Pink much more busy, as we've already talked about. And that's a part of this conversation, obviously, that needs to be had at some point. But collectively, that's where we're going. It'll make things more difficult. I don't think it'll stop things from happening.
Okay, Councillor Hayes.
Yes, my major fear with that is as you expect people to go through more process, there's going to be a backlog in getting this information and getting it through. So where people are waiting now for a month to get something through, they're going to be waiting 2 months or 3 months. And they're just going to call in the weekend warriors that come up on the Friday night, do the work on the Saturday and Sunday, which takes away work from our local contractors who do go through the processes. And they're going to build what they want, and we're going to end up with in a lot worse shape than we were if we just did a moderate increase of restrictions, or we actually stated what the restrictions were and said, as long as you stay within these parameters, you are good to go. So that's my major fear. The more red tape you make, the tighter you make, the more slips through, and that's what's going to happen.
So I see, Mr. Clark, I'm not sure how much more discussion we need on this or want on this. So Bob, go ahead, and then let's see, maybe we can wrap this up.
Just one small bit of input. I don't know if anybody's, and please, David, not a reflection on you or the workload you have. Obviously, we're under some unique conditions, which frankly could happen again. But the long story short is, anybody who thinks that this process is going to take a month or 2 months, I tried to get a new building built in Port Carling. We're all talking about economic development. I went through the process where I didn't have to do blasting or any major site plan alteration. At the end of 6 months, I went and bought a building that was completed. It took 6 months, and that's with me knowing what I'm doing. get to the point where you have people that don't know what they're doing and start thinking about how long that's going to take and what that process looks like when we're putting these controls in place and saying everybody has to go through this process. It's staggering. You know, again, if we're going down this path, please tell the people that work in this community and want to live in this community what the streamlining process is to deal with 700 plus. And frankly, if we put this stuff in place, it will be thousands of applications, well over 1,000, probably 1,500 to 2,000 before this plan gets put in place.
So those are clearly considerations moving forward, and I think this will be part of the broader and more robust discussion that will be happening through all of this drafting that occurs. But clearly there will be more to do, and for more approvals required if some of these things happen. So what I'd like to do is move forward, and I think we can probably move a little bit more quickly. Items C and D in the lake system health we've already talked about. C deals with revised minimum water frontage requirements. So we've already talked about that issue, and that's being implemented. D dealt with new revised minimum water frontage for Lake Joseph and for new water access lots that are greater than currently permitted 90 meters. So as you note, we left Lake Joe at 90, and we did increase the water access lot size, lot frontage as well. So we've done that. So I don't think we need to go back there. Item E deals with the lakes that are needing causation studies and including policies that firstly identify what these lakes are and indicate that development around them is prohibited. We have done that in section E4232. So lot creation is prohibited around these lakes that require causation studies, and all development and redevelopment on these lots is subject to the enhanced policies that we just went through in terms of requiring the soil studies, the appropriate soils. They'll be subject to the updated site alteration, and all the other rules we just talked about would also apply to these lakes as well. So I think we've got there, and I'll just finish off with this and then open it up. Item F indicates that we would include policies that require causation studies as a precautionary measure for lakes other than those identified based on specific triggers. And we have included a specific policy on that in the form of section E42.3.2C. So were there any questions about how we implemented the causation study policies in the OP?
Patricia?
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. Through you, just a question about the requirement for an OP amendment if there were additional indicators, and then there's no amendment required if the lake requiring causation. Oh, it applies to the district plan, but not to our plan. I guess it's a process question again. Why do we require an amendment to add environmental stressors? That would be nice not to have to do that. And what's the connection with the district? Obviously, they've got this in there.
Okay, simple answer. I'm hoping it's a simple answer. But when the district plan was prepared, I guess the simple idea here was that if a lake was going to be added to the list of lakes requiring a study, then there should be a formal process of some kind that does that, because once you do that, you're taking away people's rights to create lots. Potentially there may be other restrictions that occur, and it shouldn't just happen at the whim of somebody deciding it should happen. So that's the philosophy that was taken in the district's plan. Similarly, if a lake is going to come off the list and you're going to allow things to happen on that lake for whatever reason, the causation study is being done, or it's determined that the problem no longer exists, then that lake should come off a list through the same formalized process. The wording you see here basically says that that has to occur at the district level, but we don't need a local official plan amendment, i.e. we don't need another process at the local level to do the same thing because there already is one at the district level. Hopefully that's clear. It's certainly a fairer way of doing it because it has a significant impact on what you can do on your property potentially. And I always feel it's important that folks have notice and are able to provide input into that kind of decision before that decision is made. And that's why there's a formalized process required at the district. If there are any other questions on that, I know Ms. Valentine's on the line and perhaps you can expand on that, but that's the approach we've taken here.
Thank you. Supplemental?
Of course.
My biggest concern was the water quality indicators require an OP amendment. And you've addressed the taking lakes on and off, but I don't, and maybe Summer is the one that would best deal with that.
Perhaps I'll ask Ms. Valentine to weigh in on that if you don't mind, if she's still on the line.
Yep. Welcome, Summer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just looking at my clock, I was going to say good morning. I think it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. I guess I agree fully with Nick's explanation of the reason for an OPA at the district level for lakes to come on and off the list. I guess I hadn't read this draft that it was the township's desire to add additional indicators. So I guess I would ask perhaps Patricia could direct me to the actual policy number that she's looking at, or Nick can perhaps indicate whether that was the intent behind the policies, so the township would be adding additional indicators over and above what's in the district official plan. So I know that's not overly helpful, but I'm going to need more clarification in order to answer the question appropriately.
Okay, it's page 50, the second one down, E, it's actually E4231. A, B, C, D, E, and it doesn't really indicate that they are going to add. It just says they may be included.
Okay, that's a fair comment, and that's why we have first drafts. So I don't think I can give you a clear answer. There was a reason that was done. I just can't remember exactly what that is. It doesn't seem to make sense to require an amendment to add indicators from the get-go. So I'm thinking that's a wording change we can easily make to move forward. Clearly, if new indicators are identified, we shouldn't have to amend the official plan to figure that out. So that would be my answer there. So we can certainly correct that.
Thank you. Bob?
Sorry, I'm not trying to take the whole morning. But how much does a causation study cost and who pays for this? Is it, somebody give me an idea of we decide to put something on this list, or is the township paying for that? And then who's paying to get it off of this list? And, I'm just interested in this process and the cost of some of these things that we're trying to implement.
Perhaps I can ask Summer to try to answer that question.
Thanks, and through you, Madam Chair. So at the moment, it's the District of Muskoka that monitors lakes and compares lakes every year against a set of 3 indicators to determine whether a lake is considered vulnerable or not. So lakes do come on and off the list. Any lakes that are on the list would be eligible for a causation study. And those causation studies and the priority order is determined by Muskoka District Council. We completed 1 causation study in 2020 with 5 more to come in 2021, which are underway. And the budget that's being approved at this time for each causation study is approximately $20,000. So that is a cost borne by the district, and the district would typically engage consultants and the local lake residents in moving forward with that type of study.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. No, I want this left in here. The causation studies are great, but in some cases they don't study deep enough. There are other indicators other than just phosphorus. So this was put in and it says may be included because there's multiple environmental stressors that need. So I want this left in and to go to public. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's probably where we're sitting at this point. We'll just see what the public has to say.
I think that's fair. I mean, this is still the first draft, and I don't know how many drafts we'll have, but there'll be a few more after this, I'm sure. So we're going to move to policy direction number 2. But you know, this first one covered a lot, and I think we'll be able to go a little bit more quickly. So I don't know if this one is going to be as lengthy. I don't think it will, but this policy direction deals specifically with recreational carrying capacity. And I think this one I can summarize fairly quickly, and then there is only one section that deals with recreational carrying capacity, so that's easier. So the official plan should include a definition of what it is. So we've done that in section E7. We talked already about it being a hard cap on small and medium lakes. So we've done that as well in section E7C. We were supposed to indicate that it could be used in certain circumstances on large lakes where there are specific bays and channels that function in a manner that's similar to an independent water body. So we've implemented that in section E7C, 3, and E. We've also included a policy encouraging development of lake plans as well in section E6.1. And then we were also required to include policies that enable the establishment of zoning regulations where lakes are near or over capacity in order to preserve and protect the enjoyment of these lakes. And the number that we selected for near and over capacity was 90%. And we've included that within section E7F. Mr. Dyment was primarily responsible for preparing these policies and coming up with the 90%. If there are any questions, perhaps I can direct them to Mr. Dyment on these policies.
Well, perhaps I could just ask why the 90%. That might sort of be a good starting point.
Jim?
Yeah. The direction was where the lakes are nearing capacity as opposed to at capacity. And so we put 90% as saying there's still some capacity available from a recreational carrying capacity perspective, but we need to apply an abundance of caution and start, I hate to sound like Mr. Ford, but start to put the brakes on a little bit. And so we picked 90%. There's no magic to it.
Okay, thank you.
There's a couple other things if I can just draw to your attention about these policies, just to make sure that everybody understands the things that we've done. One of the things that we thought was important and we talked about in our policy discussion session was providing some definition of where you might apply recreational carrying capacity in the larger lakes. And you'll see in subsection C3, we put in that distinct bays and connections to larger portions of water bodies less than 300 meters wide shall be considered as a separate water body for the purposes of capacity calculation. And just so that members of the committees are aware, I spent quite a bit of time looking at mapping of Lake Rosso, Lake Joe, Skeleton Lake, 3 Mile Lake, and measuring, where these distinct bays are, and thought my knowledge of the lakes that that's about the right number. I'm very familiar with all of those lakes, and there have been comments made by members of the public about specific parts of lakes that they thought this should apply to, and the 300 meters catches a lot of those comments.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts, is your hand up again or did you not take it down?
It's up again, Madam Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we're under recreation carrying capacity. I do want to go back after this to lake plans because I held back my comments on lake plans at our last meeting. So I'll just talk about recreation carrying capacity. You answered my question on the 90%. There's no magic science into it. Good, as there is not. There doesn't appear to be a lot of understanding of how we arrived at the calculations for recreation carrying capacity. But you'll recall that we had Tony Usher that presented, and he presented the idea, the concept that it's just one of the tools that is used, recreation carrying capacity. And draw your attention to E7B as in Baker on page 67, the last sentence. However, it is recognized that the two factors are related. Recreation carrying capacity is one of the number of criteria to be considered when assessing applications for development. I think this needs to be expanded, either maybe under definitions or something. Specifically, what are those criterias? I know they're spread throughout the official plan, but I think in this case, we need to have them here or in the definitions. And then I would like to have an opportunity at the end of this discussion just to go back for a quick comment on lake plans. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roberts, we'll hold that other thought just for now. Mr. Scolati, David?
Yes, Chair. I have two short comments. I agree that the definitions of these things are important. And I think in E7B, we ought to use the word definition instead of just saying it is an estimate of. Just say it is defined as. That's what I would suggest. And then in a similar comment to Bob's, I'm just wondering who is actually going to do the work to do the calculation and what is that going to cost? Thank you.
Okay, who would like to answer that?
I can do it. The work's already done, save and except for the part dealing with parts of the larger water bodies. So when you see the appendix that's referenced here, the appendix that will go in there is actually the document from the background report. So the district helped us do the work, and it's not difficult even with the parts of the bays that are referred to in C sub 3 to actually do the work. District of Muskoka has excellent mapping online, and you could almost do it as a desktop exercise.
Hey, thank you. Mr. Clark.
Again, sort of fascinated when we say, we walked through this and we said there were, there wasn't necessarily a scientific basis or a way to get there. And in the areas that didn't work, we also said, okay, well, I don't know if that should really apply. The feedback I've been getting on this, I think Seguin has implemented it to some degree. They're already into making changes because they have concerns about the modeling and what it's doing to rights on certain lakes. So I think we should be learning from some of the places that have already tried to implement this. And then instead of picking arbitrary numbers, figure out if we're going to do it, let's actually come up with a scientific number and not, we had 50 people sign up a survey on a online web while they were all in Florida, and they're saying, hey, we want this. I keep hearing a lot of things about the public, which in this process has been very small input, well, lots of input from very few people and not a lot of science. And you're asking me to go to my clients and try to mitigate some of the things that are going on and sit with them. And when they ask me, oh, where did this come from? Well, we picked a number. I don't know any other business that would operate like that. So I just, again, be very careful. And, all due respect, Mr. Roberts, what we've done in this process, and I'm not trying to offend anyone, and Jim, I know you're an expert, so I'm asking for your help to get this kind of data put together. But the way we've written this second draft, just at very high level, Nick, and I sent you a side email before, is we put the most extreme and restrictive comments in here. We're not really compromising on anything. When somebody doesn't like the opposing view, what we're really saying is, well, let's just leave the most extreme and restrictive comment in this policy and we'll let the public talk about it, right? And again, it's a process. There's a whole bunch of us. I'm just letting you know, like every single item is, well, we'll just leave it the way it is then. And it's the most extreme, and it's beyond anything the district or any other municipality is asking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Well, I think we're back to this was the direction that was given by the majority of the committee, but we've got a long, long way to go. I think we're trying to continue to emphasize that this is the very beginning of the process. And when we're getting down to calculations, et cetera, I think that's a much later date that we'd be looking at that also. And we are waiting for the public input. There hasn't been that much yet. And only the ones who are interested probably are going to give us public input. I think that's how that works too. I thought I saw a hand. Did I, Patricia? Or not? No?
I think Jim had his hand up there.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
Just in one response to Mr. Clark's comment, and I appreciate them. The formula here is the same formula that was used in Seguin Township. It's also, as Mr. Usher pointed out to council, I think last summer or maybe the summer before, I was at the meeting, same formula that he's used for a number of municipalities in Halliburton. So it's been tested on hundreds of lakes and seems reasonable. And if we look back at the Osler Lake decision in Humphrey, I call it, that's how long I've been around, in Seguin Township, the board said that while there is a lack of scientific rationale for it, it's no different than the requirement in the Planning Act to provide 5% of the land for parkland. It's a community standard that's been established and well held over time. And I can't tell you where the 5% came from in the Planning Act that says you have to provide 5% of the land for parkland. But the board upheld the Seguin standard as a community standard that had been well vetted through the public and adopted by council. So
one thing I would suggest, just to assist members of the public in understanding the implications of this, and I don't know if it would stay in the final plan, but in one of the iterations of our policy direction documents, we actually included a list of the lakes that would be specifically affected by the imposition of this hard cap. And we had counted them up. So 50 of 50 lakes in the township would be affected, and we had that list. So I'm going to suggest that we include that in this section so people understand the implications, so that we can say in the end that folks knew what the implications were. I guess the appendix would help, but people have to look for it. They have to understand it. I think the table we prepared initially would go a long way to ensuring everybody knew what this means.
Excellent idea. Lori?
Yeah, the way I look at this is that on large lakes, we limit lot creation with minimum frontages. And on small lakes, minimum frontage would mean that there were not nearly that there's the lake surface area. Hold on a second, I'm going to start again. It really works well for the large lakes where there's the ratio of lake surface area to the perimeter of the shoreline is very large. Lots of lake surface to play on for every lot. And on smaller lakes, the ratio of lake surface to a lot is exponentially smaller. And so on a large lake, it makes sense to limit with the lake frontage, but on a small lake, it makes sense to limit using the circumference of the lake. Because if you take a circle with a circumference of 10 meters, you're going to have an area of 8 square meters. A circle with a circumference of 100 meters, which is 10 times that, you're going to have an area 100 lake surface 100 times. And so for the small lakes, you need to have it makes sense to have a limiting factor that is the surface area rather than the minimum frontage. And our minimum frontages are somewhat arbitrary, as we were discussing today. And so this number, given that it's somewhat arbitrary, but it's recognized generally as being acceptable in other communities, it's a way for us. It's a way for the people on the small lakes to be able to enjoy their lakes in a way that the people on the large lakes can without overcrowding.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, maybe, and that Mr. Dyment can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought when the ministry were looking at the Crown lands and lakes years ago, they were talking about 4 hectares rather than just 1.6. So, we have come down, and if you take these small lakes, and if all the boats route them. You don't want them to look like the 401 at rush hour. You can't add more lanes to a lake the way you can a highway. I can remember when it was 2 lanes from here to North Bay. Now it's 4 lanes, but you can't put extra water in the lake. So I think we have to do something. I think we should let the public and that chime in on this and see where it goes. Thank you.
Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, through you. Just touching on something that Councillor Edwards says, you can't make more water, but you could have the same surface area in 2 lakes, but one of them is 40 feet deep and the other one is 12 feet deep, and they would have a very different way to cleanse themselves, because that's what we're talking about, the ability of the lake to maintain its healthy nature despite what we do to it. So also another factor would be whether the lake is spring fed, so it's getting new fresh minerals all the time, or whether it's fed from a stream, or whether it's just a beaver pond. So these are factors that should also be considered when we're looking at recreational carrying capacity, because they will make a very distinct difference in how healthy those lakes will be.
Thank you. So,
Madam Chair, if I can just speak to that
yes, please.
just for a second. It's really important for members of the committee to understand that recreational carrying capacity has nothing to do with water chemistry. It's a function of social carrying capacity. There are plenty of things in the official plan that deal with water chemistry that are separate and distinct. And that's why, of course, that we have the policy that says it's just one of the factors to be considered in the development process. So while I appreciate the comments, understand that recreational carrying capacity deals with that top half a meter of the surface of the water and how many kids can be whipping around in tubes at the same time.
Councillor Edwards.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dyment, for that. But I was going to say, you know, it's not like the lakeshore and the Gardner, you can't stack boats. So it doesn't matter about the depth of water. It's a surface area. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you for your patience, Chair. Just on this point is that's why I brought up the point under keeping other attributing factors in play, because if you'll recall, I wanted to drop the word recreation and actually have lake carrying capacity. So, and that's why I want to know the other tools that are there to protect our lakes. Thank you.
So could I suggest, Mr. McDonald, is that a conversation, not to put you off, Councillor Roberts, but is that a conversation we would be having in the next draft or draft?
Well, I guess we've got some really good suggestions on this particular section that I think are very easily implementable by us. I'm not sure we should be calling it lake carrying capacity, because that may mean different things to different people, because we're really getting at the recreational thing. So I'm not sure that's a good idea. If you want us to consider it, we will, but I'm thinking it's not the way to go, because it might just confuse people. But I think we can certainly augment this section by identifying all of the other factors that go into making a decision when development is proposed on any lake. So that is very clear. And that the RCC model is one factor among many that have to be considered. So with that being said, I know Councillor Roberts had a question about lake plans as well that I just wanted to come back to, because it was mentioned in this section as well.
So Councillor Roberts, before you get there, I think Patricia wants to have another comment on RCC.
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. Yes, I'm having a hard time comprehending how other factors are to be included, whether they're written into this policy or not, when it is a hard cap. That doesn't really seem to leave room for negotiation. A hard cap is a hard cap, and that seems to be the only thing that would be implemented.
No, that's a good point. I think the context here is that RCC, and applying it, you're correct, is a hard cap, but there are other controls that apply to development of vacant lots and redevelopment of existing properties that also apply, that all combine to have an effect. In addition, there would be more restrictive provisions regarding shoreline structures and dockage on these lakes as well in the implementing zoning bylaw. So those are examples of the other things that would be happening too, that have an impact on recreational carrying capacity. So that's where that is going. But you're right, it is a hard cap. There is no negotiation there. I think including a table of the lakes that are affected will bring that home in terms of its implications on development for sure.
Okay, Councillor Roberts, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be very quick. Just back on lake plans, what is written there is a synopsis of what the associations had put forth in their lake plans. What I'm asking is for the consultant to meet, or someone to meet with each author, each lake association, and to confirm that the information was translated correctly, because I've been contacted by a couple of associations that says the details in there are not correct. So I think that since they are the authors, we should get them to comment on it. Also, the other point is I've been in conversation with 3 Mile Lake. 3 Mile Lake, as my understanding, will be delegating at the next general finance meeting as another lake that wants to be included in this official plan. And I hope we will allow them in at this point in time. Thank you.
As a general comment, in terms of what we did with the lake plans, and again, Mr. Dyment was responsible for this section, we tried to include components of the lake plans that we felt were planning policy related and had an impact on development. So there may be things in some of the lake plans that don't have a direct impact on approval processes or permits or so on. But having said that, we do understand the importance of lake plans to the folks that prepared it. So we're kind of flexible on how we incorporate that information. I'm thinking that through this process, because it's so public, the folks that were responsible for the lake plans, they should provide comments on these and send them in as they are, and let us know what they think should be added in. I think we've already seen one comment from Skeleton Lake folks that I've seen, some mention about beaver dams, I recall. So that's perfectly fine, and I think that would work. And certainly if there's a need for anyone to reach out to Jim directly, that would be fine as well, to talk about how we've implemented it in the policy document.
If I can just speak further to that, Councillor Roberts, I did actually talk to most of the authors of the lake plans when I was preparing the work. As Mr. McDonald said, there's some things in lake plans that are not matters that the municipality can have any effect on. For example, Little Long Lake, the municipality can't say that it's going to protect the beaver dam that's holding the water in that lake. It's just beyond your authority or ability to do it. So including it in the official plan isn't appropriate. But with Little Long Lake, we put the policies in about the existing undersized lots because of what it had in the lake plan. The other thing I'll say, and very briefly, is this was a great example of how Mr. McDonald and I worked. Because I went through all the lake plans and I created all of the policies that were appropriate for an official plan from all the lake plans. And then Mr. McDonald went through what I did and said, but this is already in the official plan, so we don't need it in the lake plan section because it's already covered by existing policies that we're going to put in the new plan. And so a lot of the stuff, in order for the members of the lake associations that wrote these things, really need to read all of the draft official plan to understand that a lot of the things they had in their lake plans have become standard policies in this proposed official plan.
Thanks, Jim, for that. I should have mentioned that as well too. So that's a good point.
I think Mr. Pink wants to say something here.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was just a quick clarification, Councillor Roberts, if I may. I think you mentioned 3 Mile Lake was coming to delegate to add. 3 Mile Lake is one of the lake plans in the official plan. Was it perhaps another lake association? I'm not aware.
Sorry. Brandy Lake.
Oh, Brandy Lake. Okay. Yes, I am.
Sorry,
speaking with
my
them.
mistake.
They're working on it.
I would like just a quick supplement, quick supplement to clarify my point to the consultants, and we welcome that that the Lake Association can deal directly with them. On Little Long Lake, it states that no new lot shall be permitted on Little Long Lake. It's impossible to create any lots on Little Long Lake. It's all Crown land. And second of all, on Leonard Lake, it talks about 7% in one of the numbers, and it should be that's been changed back to what is it, 10% or 8%. So I'm just saying, if there are, the lake associations need to just get this one right before we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a direct with them, so that's fine. I see Mayor Harding would like to say something, and then I see it's 10 to 12, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, and we're getting close to our hard cap.
Mayor Harding?
Thank you. As I continue to listen to the conversation about recreational carrying capacity, and it really is how lakes are used and number of boats, and are they sea-doos, are they canoes or whatever. I mean, there might be a small lake that only have canoes, and they could have 100 lots and all canoes and not an issue. And sometimes people end up with that character. And Councillor Roberts comments that Brandy Lake is coming. I know that one of the individuals bought a wakeboard boat and basically became shunned by his neighbors and asked to get rid of the wakeboard boat. So, I mean, that may be part of that as well, because it wasn't really in character or keeping with the lake. And I guess I'm almost wondering, is there an ability, because I really hate prescribing our views on certain lakes and character. I know RCC came up when we talked about Leonard Lake, or I think it was on Ricketts Lake or another lake that, you know, we're kind of saying some of the neighbors said, we don't want this. Use RCC to control it. I wonder if we just slightly revise this, saying we allow for RCC, but would be implemented through a lake plan. So if a lake wants it, if their lake plan wants it, they could put it in their own individual lake plan, as opposed to us driving it down on 50 lakes. I leave that as a food for thought.
Well, it'd be interesting to hear what those 50 lakes have to say, I guess. I don't know. Food for thought, yes. Okay, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, so I think now is a good place to stop. I think we've made a lot of progress. I know we've only gone through 2 policy directions, but these were 2 very significant policy directions. It's almost good we did this up front because I think we should be able to get through the rest of them. I knew I was being overly ambitious this morning when I said we'd get through them all, but you know, I have to set some kind of goal, and I made that effort. So I guess there really isn't much to do in the form of recapping other than to say we are getting together again on Tuesday afternoon at 1 p.m. I think there's a bit more flexibility if we need to go longer that day, although I'm not going to suggest that at this point. 3 hours is probably enough for everybody. But my goal would be to try to get through all of the policy directions in the next meeting. I think we've talked about some of the bigger picture issues, so I think that'll save time as we go through it. I certainly see, based on where we are now, that we're going to need a 4th meeting. I don't see us finishing all of what we need to talk about on Tuesday, and I can't recall what that extra date is, but perhaps Mr. Pink could refresh us just so that we have that in our calendars and can plan ahead for that. Mr. Pink?
Mr. Pink.
Thank you, Chair. I did not select a date. I was waiting to see how 3 meetings would do. I suspect council or committees may want to see draft 2 before it goes out for further public consultation. I was wondering if the 4th meeting could have been utilized for that. I agree with you, Mr. McDonald. We'll get through this on Tuesday. It's also difficult to coordinate everyone's schedule. I was hoping perhaps if we could all generally agree, perhaps the chair could select some dates, and with some nodding of heads, we can agree on that 4th meeting date now, and staff is happy to then secure the chambers and circulate an agenda.
Just to be clear, Mr. Pink, on this, I do see a need for a meeting to review a further draft. I guess I'm thinking that we'll need the 3 hours on Tuesday just to finish the policy directions. And I know we'll need another meeting to talk about the balance of the policies. So I'm talking about a 4th meeting before we start drafting any kind of second draft. I know, for example, we have a resort policy section that will consume lots of energy, and there's no way we're going to get to that on Tuesday. So I'm just thinking ahead that it's a 4th meeting before we start drafting, just to be clear.
I agree, but I think we need you there, and we need Mr. Dyment there. So why don't we start with your calendar,
okay,
not mine?
Fair enough. The afternoon of the 13th and any time on the 15th.
Well, the afternoon of the 13th is a library board meeting for 2 of us. The 15th, we have planning. We schedule it after planning. Mr. Pink, any thoughts on that?
I will be in a LPAT hearing on the 13th and the 14th. 15th is planning committee, likely to be a long one. I don't know if we'd have the energy to have an all day, but I leave that in committee's hands. We could try the afternoon, but I see some nodding.
Alternative is 16th in the morning.
16th, I believe, works for me currently. Mr. McDonald.
16th in the morning would work for me. Maybe starting fresh is a better plan.
So I'm sorry, I have to turn my voice off when David's speaking. Did you say the 16th works for you?
That's correct, in the morning.
And anybody else here? Are there any conflicts that we can see at this point? This would be amazing if there are no conflicts. Okay. Friday, April 16th at 9 a.m. So I've decided that planners take happy pills because they both of you have been talking about how we were going to get through this in 2 or 3 meetings. So must run in the whole thing.
Yeah, well, we're very optimistic, positive people, so that's what we keep on relying on.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it, Mr. McDonald. Anything else?
That is it for me. Thank you.
Okay, well, listen, thank you, everybody. It is a lot of hard work and there's a lot of detail, and we keep emphasizing we're going to have many more of these discussions, but I look forward to seeing everybody again on Tuesday, and happy lockdown Easter, I think is what I can say to you. That's what it looks like it's going to be. So, okay, everyone, I think I have to put my motion in place. Let me get back to I can see the clerk smiling now. Moved by Councillor Kelly, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved that the Special Planning Committee meeting adjourn at 11:58 a.m. All in favor? Great. Okay, thanks everyone and have a good weekend.
Bye-bye. Have a great weekend.